In this fourth session of week 4, we will discuss about South Korean government policy to encourage people to consume more wheat and barley while consume less rice. And that's because of the rice price was going up because the country could not produce enough rice for the market. Now this is a new government, began with military coup by the former military general Park Chung-hee, and his government strongly promoted and encouraged the people to consume more wheat flour and less rice, and that's to control the rice price in the market. So they made a new national movement, which is the promotion of a mixed grain and flour meal. And now in this campaign, they pursued and encouraged the people to save rice and instead eat more flour-based foods such as bread and noodle. Nevertheless, Koreans were not used to bread, and bread was not really popular at that time. But nevertheless, the other side, the noodles became more popular, and today the South Korean culinary culture include a lot of noodle dishes, and that originated, as a matter of fact, from this era. People were strongly encouraged, well, almost forced, to mix rice with barley and other grains, and so that the South Koreans could consume more wheat products such as bread and noodle. So school children, when they go to school, they bring lunchbox, but that lunchbox was inspected by a teacher or by someone else from the school every day. And what they would check is if that lunchbox, their rice, includes a certain proportion of non-rice grains, such as barley or millet, and so on. So this was very interesting that you should have at least 20% of other grains other than rice. And if you didn't, of course, you are not severely punished, but this was not a good thing to do in those days. Also, the tteokbokki, which is very popular Korean food today, the tteokbokki traditionally was made out of rice flour, but now in that time, tteokbokki was made out of wheat flour. And that's why rice tteokbokki became a luxurious food at that time. Anyway, the wheat flour-based tteokbokki was much cheaper and more readily available everywhere, and it became more popular food for children, especially as a snack food in those days. And also, the traditional liquor, alcoholic liquor made out of rice, was not possible in this time, so people had to make alcoholic drinks such as makgeolli and soju, which used to be made out of rice, now disappeared from market, but many alcoholic beverages were made out of wheat flour and sweet potatoes instead of rice. And here I put some of the posters of the time, and if you look at the poster, the first poster on the far left, it says, "This mixed grain meal that I'm having, it makes me strong and healthy, and so does my country." So it's not just my body, but our country becomes stronger and healthier if we or me consume more non-rice grains. Okay, so here on the left, the gentleman is having noodle, and the lady on the right, she's having some sort of bread. Okay, and as I said, noodle was more successful than bread, at least at that time. But today, maybe in contemporary Korean society, bread is as popular as noodle. And also, the next from the far left, it says, our life, if we improve our life by having more wheat flour-based food, and our body also becomes better and healthier. Okay, so that was government department spread out that kind of posters. And then also, another poster, it shows the city of Seoul. The mayor announced that the city will host the cooking classes using wheat flour. So you can tell that this policy of encouraging people to use and eat more wheat flour in daily life was a very systematic movement. And so fundamentally, they had to teach people what to cook and use what kind of recipe they should use to make more edible and more popular and tasty the meals out of wheat. And so the advertisement there was, it advertises yeast, which is not a part of traditional Korean ingredients, other than some fermented food, such as doenjang and so on. Now this is essential in bread making. So they were trying to teach people how to use yeast and how to make bread and so on. And of course, the great success came when the first instant ramen noodle appeared in South Korea as from Samyang food company, Samyang Ramen, and it became quite popular later. And as I said, traditional rice-based alcoholic drinks were not available in those days because it was strongly either discouraged or it became almost illegal if you produce alcoholic beverages out of rice. So, particularly makgeolli, the most popular Korean alcoholic drinks for ordinary people, which used to be made out of rice, now that disappeared at that time, and it reappeared only after the end of probably in early 1980s, when South Korea finally had enough rice for the domestic market. And this was possible because the government research institute invented a new variety of rice, which they call unification rice, or 통일벼 in Korean. And this was a result of the global studies of food production increment, and supported by Americans and elsewhere. And everywhere in the world after the Second World War, the American government as well as private organizations such as Ford Foundation and so on, they spent huge amount of money to help people to be fed enough. Again, as I said, that was because of the Cold War, because of the starvation. And they believed communism is possible, communism will spread more when people are not fed enough. And that's why, with their effort, they tried to invent new varieties of crops which can produce more grains. And the general principle here is you make the stalks of grains of either wheat or corn or rice, anything, make it short, because short stalks can sustain more grains. And short stalks would require less water. And also chemical fertilizers produced by American companies were supplied with a new irrigation system and building dams and so on everywhere in the world. And 통일벼 was a part of this result, happened in South Korea. So this, with the appearance of this new variety of rice, unification rice, now Koreans were released from this earlier restriction of consuming rice because 통일벼 was productive enough and it was very, now South Korean market had enough amount of rice. The only problem was this rice, Koreans didn't like it too much because it was not as tasty as the traditional variety. But anyway, now with the massive production of rice, rice-based alcoholic liquors returned and makgeolli was available and made out of rice. Anyway, so in 1970, per capita daily rice consumption in South Korea peaked. And since then, especially mid-1980s, rice consumption per person has started to continuously decline. And that, of course, requires reduction of rice production. So very interesting. Until 1970s, the government tried very hard to persuade people eat less rice and consume more non-rice-based grains. And also the government persuaded the farmers to grow more rice. But already by mid-1980s, now there was too much rice in the market and farmers started to move away from rice cultivation. And as I said, since now enough rice was produced and this so-called chronic barley hump ended in the late 1970s, the previous restrictions of rice consumption was disappeared. And now what is this barley hump? Barley hump in Korean, that's a 보리고개. And traditional Korea, the farmers would harvest their crops in autumn. And rice is harvested in autumn, and they will start to consume that newly harvested rice after paying taxes and so on. And they would survive, they have to survive until they harvest new grain. And sometime in Joseon Dynasty, this rice field was used to grow barley after rice is harvested during late autumn and winter and early spring. And the first barley you can harvest probably around April or May. But that's possible only if you can sustain yourself with the rice that you harvested in late autumn, and you and your family will survive with that rice before the first harvest of barley. Nevertheless, many people couldn't make it, and they would starve and die before the first barley was harvested. And Koreans called it as a barley hump or 보리고개. Of course, 보리고개 became a legend by now. So in this session, we talked about the South Korean government's desperate effort to save rice and persuading people to consume more non-rice-based food and grains such as wheat and barley. And in our next session, we will talk about instant ramen, which appeared in early 1960s, and now that instant ramen was suitable for this particular era when government tried to persuade people consume more wheat.